Ons gesels nou met Mark Shaw en dit is oor sy boek Give Us More Guns. Jy wil hierdie boek koop, ons gaan vir hom pand want ek regtig is lewensveranderend. And Mark was is director Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and he was also National Research Foundation Professor of Justice and Security, University of Cape Town, and also 10 years United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. A big welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Jono. Thank you very much.
We're speaking to you. You're in Geneva now.
I'm in Vienna, actually, but
Okay.
our headquarters is in Geneva, indeed.
So we're going to get there. I just want to find out. It is. I opened a couple of newspaper articles just from October up to literally 3 days ago, and everyone I'm reading about in newspapers, there's names that's in this book: organized crime, gun crime. And I want to find out, in 2017 you wrote Hitman for Hire. Is there some of these characters that was in the forefront in 2017 that's still in the forefront in 2021?
It's a good question. Yes, the truth is that the same, you could call them sort of organized crime figures, many of them in the Western Cape, are still active, and they are mentioned in both books. In fact, there's some evolution in the criminal market, but some of the key individuals remain constant.
So I'm going to, take another angle with the book. I'm going to punt this book because I want people to read it. We're going to focus more on the Cape gangs, and I just got to the taxi gangs. You kept me up last night, getting up at 4, but I couldn't put this book down. It's very close to home. I don't know if you know this, but the wife of Lieutenant Colonel Kinnear, Nicolette's been working for our company for years. So it was a very close to home murder. We all very still interested in what's happening. She was in the newspapers 3 days ago, very sensitive. And for me, fascinating with this book, and I only realize it now, that it started with bad cops in 2007, and eventually, someone as good as Colonel Kinnear got killed in 2020 because of that. That whole organized crime thing, it feels out of control. What's your view?
Yeah, the book tries to describe, first to say Nicolette Kinnear is a very courageous woman, as you know. I didn't know that she was working with you guys, but she posts actively, and she has really stood up in the wake of her husband's assassination. So I have an enormous amount of respect for her. To answer the question, there's been an evolution of organized crime in South Africa. It essentially, of course, there was criminal networks and activities present in the late 80s and the 90s. But as South Africa integrated, I would say, late 1990s, early 2000s, the growth of drug markets globally, an acceleration after 2000. And so what were essentially street gangs practicing extortion, drug trafficking and the like, evolved quite dramatically into the period that we have now. And as I describe it, and you know that there's a count of the number of gangsters, of course, that's just an estimate. But you have a system which really works on a triangle in the Western Cape and on the Cape Flats. It's sort of the sale of drugs, so turf around which drugs are sold, the need to recruit people into gangs, and of course the need to defend turf, where guns become absolutely a key to that process. And on top of that is a key set of high-profile criminal actors. Now, not every one of those guys who's in the news are high-profile. There are others. So let's say there are around 20 top guys in the Western Cape. And the assassination of Colonel Kinnear is linked to this case in the sense that the sale of the guns from the police armory, as the book describes, is connected overall to the failing systems around gun control, if you like, corruption in the licensing system, and then Kinnear was involved in the investigation of some of those cases, and then his assassination. So it's this long stream of activity where guns remains a sort of, or the illegal gun market, let's say, remains a golden thread which runs through all of these activities. last point just to make quickly is our work elsewhere as a global initiative in, I don't know, Central America, Latin America, elsewhere. This connection between drug markets and guns is absolutely essential. And it occurs in Brazil, in Central America, and of course it occurs very much in the context of Cape Town. And gangs and gangsters target places where there's bulk guns, and the state is, of course, one of those. And I think that's what the book is about. That's what the story is about.
And then just to wrap it up with Colonel Kinnear, you think his death was a turnaround? I mean, we're talking high-profile people. That was his bosses at his funeral. That's now kind of suspended. There's a lady that they caught that tried to kill him a couple of years ago with the hand grenade. It's as if it just broke open all the corrupt ones on the police side and on the criminal side, like Modak.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hope so. I mean, certainly things have a different feel to it before and after his killing. And to kill a senior police officer, I think, is a kind of change in the process. Again, you can see that elsewhere. Absolutely key, in my view, is to make sure that case runs and that there are convictions in the end. That case and two others, if I can say, and that's the two cases around fraudulent gun licenses against two high-profile criminal bosses in the Western Cape. And then, of course, to finish the case, the Prinsloo case, because that, of course, is still in process, as you know from the book. And so I think there's a sort of cluster, a constellation of cases which are ongoing now, that if they are completed and if they lead to convictions and if corruption doesn't intervene in the process, I think will signify a significant turnaround. So I think we genuinely have to wait and see. I think as civil society, the media and others, we have to focus on these cases because they matter a lot for how ordinary people on the Cape Flats and more generally live. And an ability to deal with gun crime, gun violence, I think will have an effect on improving people's lives.
And then we're gonna speak later about Colonel Christian Prinsloo and Captain Naidu and how this thing started selling guns. But focusing on the Cape Flats gangs, I want to call it by the name Russian gangs or East European. Then the taxi bosses. If you can define the term, we've got 1 minute. The term gang for me. So it's so much different, the taxi gangs to the Cape Flats. Just to sum it up.
Well, a gang is essentially a criminal enterprise, and it occurs at different levels. It's an organization, often with a symbolic name, tattoos, and the like. It controls turf. You can argue that gangs exist on a spectrum from sort of loosely organized youth gangs, which are, I would say, less organized crime, to more hardcore organized crime. But the principle is one of organization and focus on criminal enterprise, Yone. I think that would be the way to describe it. And guns are key to that.
We're going to chat a little bit later, so just stay tuned. Thank you, Mark. En as jy wil net die omvang hiervan net wil besef, in die Kaap alleen, as ons praat van die bendes, op hierdie stadium is daar meer as 71,000 bendelede, waarvan Amerika se grootste is in die 28s, en almal van hulle soek 'n gun. Dan praat ons nie eers van die taxi-industrie, as jy kyk, elke dag in die koerant is waar daar iemand doodgeskiet, of 'n taxibaas, of iemand in taxies. Dis ongelooflik die name wat jy hier gaan inlees. Jy moet dit kry, selfs as jy wil weet wat kos elke geweer op die swartmark. Hierdie ons koop hierdie goed aan vir R3,000, maar hy verkoop hy selfe geweer vir R35,000. Hoe stop jy dit? En dan kom ons definitief by kolonel Christian Prinsloo uit. Wat 'n storie, en niemand weet waar hy nou nie. Ons gesels al die pad daar in Europa met Mark Shaw oor sy boek Give Us More Guns. Mense vra waar kry jy hom? Hy is oral beskikbaar. Jy moet hom koop. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Just to summarize the research on this book for people, this book wasn't written just reading articles. There was basically more than 200 interviews with gangsters, crime bosses, government officials. And my question, maybe a weird question, they know who you are, you know who they are. Aren't you scared?
The process of doing research is always challenging, I suppose. So the answer is no, not really. I think it's a story that needs to be out there. And the one thing about also gangsters, etc., is that people want to and will talk if you can build enough confidence in them. A lot of the interviews were around numbers of gangsters, etc., as well as around the pricing of firearms. So there's an annex at the back you may have seen, which was it's quite difficult research to do, sort of to try and understand what the illicit underworld gun market is and what the prices are. So this required speaking to a lot of people in the system. But I didn't feel that I could write the book without speaking to people on the ground in a variety of ways. And for me, it is a story about Prinsloo. That's absolutely true. But I also wanted to look at what the guns did in communities and what the guns did to the gangs themselves. And so to do that, I think it was important to speak with people, gang members and others around the illicit economy, so to speak.
One question we get a lot is the whole campaign to just hand in your gun and with the licensing. And now, after reading this book, I mean, we're talking 9,000 plus guns that was in state custody, that's back on the street, killing people daily. The trust. But I want to just tell one story, and that's Colonel Christian Prinsloo. Looks like your neighbor, good cop, ballistic, expert, and starting 2007 to pay his son's tuition fees and realizing there's a big market for these guns. And then he hooks up with another colleague, Captain Naidu, and they're not the only two. And it's a very scary thought. So just that, how do you, I mean, for me, no one knows where he's now because he got bail October last year. He was supposed to be 18 years in jail. People felt he must be in jail forever because his kid's being killed. Do you think he's under witness protection? Or just give us a little bit background about him and where do you think he is?
So he was, as you read in the book, sort of the SAPS's gun expert. I mean, that's the irony about it. He was quoted as, and I use those a quote in the book, for example. He was quoted as urging people to hand in their weapons in some of the earlier amnesties. But I guess he spotted a business opportunity, and the book makes the point, as you might have seen, that although he began in 2007, 2008, that in fact there was already a market for police guns previous to that. And I show some statistics about lost and stolen police guns before that. So in a sense, he must have spotted the market, but he was eager, I think, and you mentioned Naidu, and in a sense, I think the two of them, Naidu in fact may have begun first and then followed by him. Naidu is also I think likely to give evidence in forthcoming trials. But Prinsloo didn't want to get too close to the gang, so he used an intermediary who in a sense made contact with gangsters and began to sell the firearms. And it's a very cynical crime, as you imply. No, it's you sort of take these guns in bulk, you sell them down to gangsters. It's almost, for me, and I tried to describe that in the book, it's almost unbelievable that he didn't know what would happen to those weapons, both in terms of the killing that would result, but also its implication for the reorganization of the gangs themselves. And he did this over a number of years. And his earlier story was that he had sold the weapons to anti-piracy patrols off the coast of Somalia, and that the guns would then be thrown overboard. But as the book explains, that's essentially a nonsense. He was selling to the gangsters from that period, and he sold cheap, is my view, and that's what gangsters say. So they could buy bulk in cheaply, and then they sold on more expensive at a higher price, and that created a sort of gun economy, particularly in the Western Cape. But the so-called Prinsloo guns, which have a particular filing on them with the serial numbers removed, have been found all over the country: Durban, Nelson Mandela Bay, Joburg, etc.
Sure. And the shocking thing is that he said if he wasn't caught, he wouldn't have stopped. He would just go on with it. So luckily he was caught. So now maybe a bit of my conspiracy theory. We're going to chat maybe later about it. I'm just going to drop the question with you. My personal view is they're under witness protection because he was spotted, but no one knows who him or neither. They're gone. But there's a lot of cases of breaking up, and one was just now in February with Anderson. I hope I get his surname right. Paranji from Durban, 40 years old.
Yeah.
I just want to find out, so I'm going to chat to you later, but I just want to find out, you think they spilling the beans, Prinsloo and Naidu, and still motivating people to buy the book? So Mark, just stay tuned, we'll chat now. As jy net ingeskakel het, ons gesels met Mark Shaw oor sy boek Give Us More Guns, en ons het nou gesels oor kolonel Christian Prinsloo, saam met wat nou 18 jaar tronkstraf gekry het, maar eintlik nou maak hom mens op parol, maar ek dink hy's onder witness protection, soos hulle in Engels sê. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Renee.
We just spoke about the two main figures and then the rest of Anderson, Paranji from Durban. Two questions. First, he got bail. Everyone knows he's a weapons smuggler. This is the first question. Why do these guys get bail? And the other one is, why is it so difficult to get them in jail?
Look, the case of Anderson Paniachi, he's alleged to have sold guns on to a particular gang in the Western Cape, the terrible Joosters, and those have been linked to the killing of 8 people. These are, as always, these are complex investigations because the state is, as in the case of the intermediary in relation to Prinsloo, trying to prove a racketeering, so and a process of organization, if you like, of organized crime. But your earlier question around these individuals, the Padiachi case, which I think comes to court in June, so another case to watch, suggests at least that guns continue to filter out of the system. And the other day, as you also implied, I think a gun was seized in Hanover Park on the Cape Flats that had been handed in the latest amnesty. So at least some evidence that, okay, Prinsloo is under witness protection, he's about to give evidence against others, but that the leakage from the system continues, perhaps not at the same level because it was really extreme in the case of Prinsloo. But the sort of concern that the firearms process that the police manage is broken in some ways.
And it's a scary thing. It feels like we're never going to win this fight. So my next question is the names, everything's in this book, and I'm not going to give away everything. I haven't touched on the taxi gangs, and there's names like previous President Zuma, Tsele. There's names of these businessmen. You will not write this if they can take you to court. So there must be some truth in what you say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you write a book like this, you get it legally reviewed. You make sure that you are saying stuff that is factually correct. But at the same time, I'm South African, obviously. You want to tell a story, and it's a story that matters. It's a story that, for me, the shocking nature of the story is that the state, which is meant to secure and bring safety to communities, essentially failed and there's no better word for it than pumping weapons back, for example, onto the Cape Flats. And what surprised me so much about the book and people's response to it is that people are shocked. They don't know the story. And that's, of course, because the trial has been covered in a number of individual articles, but not pulled together as a single story. That's the first reason. And the second reason is that gun crime is, it focuses or concentrates in the most marginalized communities in and around Cape Town, for example, amongst others. So it's a story that is hidden, and it has had enormous impact. When you speak to communities I haven't put a lot of that stuff in the book. You speak to mothers of kids who have been killed, small kids. There was a 4-year-old who lost their eye the other day. In a sort of shootout in the crossfire. These are hugely traumatic things for many ordinary people, and those guns, many of them came from the state. So, in a sense, we have a responsibility, as the book argues, to get them back. And if we can get them back, we can continue the process around gun safety, which began with the 2000 legislation, which was bearing an effect, and then which in a sense has unraveled. So in my view, there needs to be a new consensus around the issue of implementing the legislation that we have, to get all the actors together again, to build again a unified approach to doing it. But my sense is, from speaking to lots of people and watching the news closely, is we're still quite far from that. And I hope in the coming days that Parliament, amongst others, I think the Parliamentary Committee has a key role here to take some leadership around building that consensus again, around getting everybody on board.
We've got 1 minute. And what was shocking, even people that took in an antique gun, it was sold. Hunting rifle, it was sold. 9mm, it was sold. I don't know if it's legal, but do you think it's wise just destroy your gun before you take it in? Do something to it so it can't be used again. Is that good advice? Because I won't take, after this book, I will not take my gun into the police. I mean, it was 46 police stations that was red flagged, and all of a sudden that disappeared and only became 3 police stations. So there's definitely still going on.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one I'm asked before. And the simple answer is, I don't feel it's appropriate to advise people to break the law just because somebody else has broken the law. I think the amnesty has ended. We don't have time to discuss it, the sort of people license renewal and handing their guns in and all the complexities and the very poor communication from the state on this. But what is absolutely key, I think, is to pressure the state in a variety of ways to improve the system of gun control, accountability, oversight, etc. This debate, in some ways, is just beginning again. In January, February, in February in particular, there was quite a lot of heated discussions in the parliamentary committee itself. So, the media has a role to cover the cases of the individual gang bosses implicated with corrupt licenses. Citizens have a role, etc., etc. We've got to do better here. But it doesn't help if everybody breaks the law fundamentally. We have to fix the system, and currently the system is broken, in my opinion.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mark. I can't wait for the next book. Definitely motivating people to get their hands on this one. It explains this underworld brilliantly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you and your team.
Great. Bye. Jy moet nie jou geweer breek vir hom ingee nie. Dit is ook onwettig. Ek het dit nie gesê nie. Dit is onwettig.